Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Take Your Career to the Next Level with CIM Qualifications. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items so you know how to participate in today's event. The presentation will last for approximately 45 minutes, with time at the end for questions. You'll have the opportunity to submit text questions to today's presenter by typing your questions into the questions pane of the control panel. You may send in your questions at any time during the presentation. We will collect these and address them during the Q&A session at the end of today's presentation. I would now like to introduce Charles Nixon, who will be running today's presentation. Over to you, Charles.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. And this is going to be a run-through of what we have seen as changes in the world of marketing and how those implicate the reasons why we need to keep our skills up to date and how we can do so with the range of qualifications and awards from the CIM. This is a couple of years out of date in one respect, but therefore basically marketing has changed more in the last 2 years than it has in the 52 before then. And marketing has had a tremendous set of changes, because not only is it changes in digital, it's in economics, it's in technological and social issues. So we're going to have a look at some of those as we go through today's presentation and see what the implications are in what we need as a skill set for a modern marketer. So one of the things that's happened is that we have a situation whereby we've gone through, we seem to be, hang on a second, let's go back. We seem to be in a situation of change which has evolved over a period of time. We've got a situation where what Schumpeter, who was a great economist of many years ago, would have called waves of creative destruction. Those waves have basically historically been things such as motive power, railways, automobiles, steam power, electricity, but they have reigned a wave of creative destruction is his term, but essentially we see it as being new technologies giving new opportunities as well as destroying old industries. And the question is, how do we adapt to those changes over that period of time as these new technologies become the norm? So what we're looking for here is a situation of where do these things actually apply. We seem to be moving a little bit fast here with these slides, so let's just go back a second. So we have changes which are going to affect the way in which we adapt to technology, the way in which technology is wearable, the way in which we might actually use technology in these smartphones that we now carry around. But we've also got this issue which is now the Internet of Things. The element, the fact that we will get over a period of time, up to 20 billion, some estimates are now 50 billion devices connected to the internet. And how will this change the world for everyone as a consumer, but also indeed how does marketers now adapt to the scenario of what may well become machine-to-machine marketing? And what we have to think about then is what will this mean for the various economies? Seem to have a delay, I think, in the slide. So the sharing economy is one of those things that comes about from this. We now have this ability to be able to use the spare resources, whether it happens to be people's back rooms, whether it happens to be car sharing, whether it happens to be people's skill sets. And so the element here is as much as anything is that we need to think about how this changes the nature of business. Constantly, I don't know about you, but I am reading on a daily basis Uber challenging marketplaces, now moving into food delivery as well as into car hire. And how do car companies respond to this? Peugeot yesterday announced that it's going to set up its own car sharing for its own owners in a response to the rise of others either adopting Uber or the new Chinese one. So the question comes from a strategic point of view: how does a company respond to these? And we need to think about this as marketers, because we are the opportunity seers. The slide here is quite an interesting one, because this comes from the World Bank, and basically every red area is where there are more women in economic activity than there are men. So interestingly enough, whilst we look occasionally at the constant idea of emerging markets and go for BRICS or mints or whatever, it's actually women who are probably the most economically being empowered, and therefore we need to think quite clearly about how it is that we move our perceptions as to what it is that people want to buy from being necessarily male orientated to female orientated. I was at a seminar probably about 18 months or so ago now, in which some of the senior car companies at the luxury end were discussing the problems that they have on dealerships, that when women come to buy more powerful, expensive cars, the salespeople's natural assumption is they're going to wait until the partner or husband comes along to explain the details. And that, of course, is getting them a very bad reputation. So we do need to think quite clearly about how the customer is changing in the market. The customer is also changing in terms of population. Population is moving on the basis of it growing theoretically up to 10 billion in the next few years. And that has considerable implications for where people are based. Now we have over 50% of the global population actually based in cities. So what does that mean for your marketing and distribution? We also have an aging population. This is the age profile for the Japanese market, which, as you can see, from basically from 1950, has more or less been stood on its head in 100 years. So we now have many more people who are in the older categories that we would have otherwise considered to be normal target audiences for, say, clothing. An interesting example here is Marks and Spencer's used to be the normal place to go for clothing for people 30 or 40 years ago. Now most young people wouldn't dream of necessarily getting their fashion from Marks and Spencer's, yet Marks and Spencer still tries to target them, ignoring the fact that if you were to walk into a Marks and Spencer's, you would find that the majority of the women shopping in there have got white hair. Another example from one marketplace in Japan is that, as you can see, that there is a large number of people now in the 70 plus market that actually adult nappies, yes, adult nappies, are outselling children's nappies. And that's something that, if you're clever and you understand the way in which the marketplace is changing, you need to respond to. So one of the issues that we have is that the marketplace has moved from being at the bottom of the pyramid, as we see in that chart slide that we had ago there, which is from C.K. Pralhad's famous book, The Fortune at the Bottom of the Pyramid, which was about the fact that the market was addressing everybody at the top end in the wealthy markets, but not addressing the emerging marketplaces of Africa and Asia. Well, those now have been addressed by people repackaging their products to those marketplaces, and at the same time considering how they can change the nature of what they offer in terms of health and hygiene, but also thinking about the sustainability of the products. Unilever here being a very good example. Now this slide is about content marketing, because this is essentially now some of the big issues that we as marketers face. So we need to think about how we actually make our presence felt in a very communicative, intensive world. We now need to think about the way in which the consumer wants to know about what it is that we offer. And so we have to provide content, whether it's through social media, websites, etc. And as a result of which, we need to make sure that we understand what we are writing in order to gain the authority, and where we place it. Context marketing is an increasingly important issue as to how we actually get our information to the marketplace at the right time. Let's get these slides back into the importance, because the other aspect is going to be curation. And what we need to think about here is how do we manage the automation of our content now that we have a large number of data sources available to us, and output that information in such a way that we actually manage the return on investment of marketing content. And that therefore brings us to things such as analytics and being masters of the analysis of the big data that we have, and understanding what conclusions to draw, whether it happens to be from Google Analytics, whether it happens to be from our own website, which we might use for other data sources, whether it might be Hootsuite for social media. But we need to think quite clearly about the data that we have, what we need to actually bring in terms of analysis to those sets of data. Marketing has always believed that nirvana is around the corner in terms of information. But today that is writ large for us, because the big data sets that we now play with are about to bring about paralysis in terms of decision making if we do not understand the way in which we should analyze it and draw conclusions. So automation becomes very important to us. Now the world has changed, because historically speaking, we would send some text around the world to say that we've got a wonderful sort of situation that we've seen. We then would start to post some pictures about it. But now the world's big data sets now comprise huge amounts of information being uploaded on a daily basis. And we now have to think about how we can utilize that. This set of slides from Facebook basically showing that the sheer volume of data is now the fact that we've now moved from being just photographs to videos. And the latest thing that we're all talking about is the use of VR or AR, augmented reality, and how does that have an impact on what we should offer. Customers or potential customers are probably no longer satisfied by looking at the scenario of just a nice picture. They want to see around, whether it happens to be an apartment that you might be wanting to buy, whether it happens to be experiencing a trip in Tesla if you're going to buy one, and if you are thinking about the way in which you can offer a reality experience to people before they buy, then these are the things that you need to think quite clearly about how you're going to utilize them. Virgin Holidays recently used VR headsets to give a small group of people an experience of where they were considering booking a holiday. And they found that they had something like a 30% uplift in bookings as a result of people actually seeing a VR presentation rather than actually just having the brochure. So some of the skills we need to think about quite clearly for us are, how do we respond to these markets in terms of the skill sets that we need? We need to be good at analytics. We need to be good at understanding customers and gaining insights. We need to be good at understanding the ways in which the world is changing, both technically, socially, and politically, as well as economically. So the CIM has responded to this by producing a new set of standards for marketers. These standards, basically as a result of large-scale market research amongst marketers and non-marketers in business, has produced a set of standards which allow us for the first time to really understand what it is that people need to function as at different levels in marketing. And they offer a pathway to the development. So what we need to understand here is that we need to do a better job. And if I move on to this slide here, which is quite useful because this basically sets out an ideal marketing department. And in the core, you can see there that there are essentially championing the customer, writing them strategy, and having insights into the marketplace are what everybody needs to understand. Everybody who works in marketing, whether it's at the low level or at a high level. But then there are considerable amounts of specialist areas where skills need to be identified and then trained. Integrated marketing communications is obviously the one that most people would believe is the central point of marketing. Ask anybody what is marketing, it's about communications. But it's much more than that. It is about things such as research and understanding the trends that we talked about a few minutes ago, understanding how we might distribute the products and services that we offer in terms of channels or partnership marketing, understanding the risks that there are that we need to think quite clearly about in terms of the reputation that might be on the line if we get something wrong in social media, understanding the ethics of sourcing our products and the supply. We need to think about our digital capability here very clearly. Obviously, we need to think about the things that I mentioned earlier of social media and the Internet of Things. But we also need to think about, what is the value proposition that we offer in the marketplace? What is it that we are actually going to deliver which is a better value for money than an alternative? And here pricing becomes an important issue. And so some of the dreaded aspects for many people in marketing is the actual calculations of numbers and figures, but these are essential these days. We have to understand metrics and the way in which we measure things and the way in which we calculate value, because this is what companies now need. Customer experience, obviously managing that process, understanding how we can improve it. And these are just a good example. We're going to go through these in a little bit more detail now and see how the CIM standards actually move. They're at 5 different levels. Let's come back to that slide, because the 5 different levels here are very important. And for a lot of people, the question I often get asked is, what level should I be at? And so at the bottom level is the entry level, which is awareness. This is for people who basically need to be aware with a limited amount of knowledge as to what it is that maybe the rest of the department is doing or their boss is asking them to assist with. So for example, it may well be asking people to do a pest analysis of the economic, political, social and technological aspects of the world around us. The analysis is a collection of data, and so a marketing assistant needs to understand why it's been done, but possibly doesn't need to understand all the details of drawing conclusions. At an active level, people are getting a meaningful knowledge of that information and the skills and how it should be applied. At an able level, they should be applying it. And when they become a level of accomplished, they will probably be at a management level, maybe a senior management level, who is directing others and understands why it's being done and can ask the questions that are needed and start the process rather than just responding to other people asking it. And at the top, the authority level is what we would probably consider to be someone who is a chartered marketer, who is authoritative on the subject, practices the topics that they are experts in on a regular basis. Now, the important thing to understand here is you do not have to be at the authoritative or accomplished level in every topic in the skill set. What we need to understand is what skills are appropriate for your job. So what we need is these core functions we mentioned before. Insight, here we need to understand things such as the second half of the chessboard. And this is an interesting one because this is about understanding strategy and drawing from that strategy conclusions. So you may recognize the picture here of Watson, which is the IBM supercomputer that won the Jeopardy quiz show on television a little while ago. But essentially what it is a cloud-based and artificial intelligence computer. It has the ability to consume more data. And the reason why it was successful, and it was important that it was successful on that program, was that it was able not only to understand spoken instructions, but it was able to decode those instructions from what were essentially cryptic questions, as you might see in a crossword, or you would see on an English pointless program or something like that. It was also able to understand when it should actually press the button. Now, that may sound a little trivial, but when you think about the fact that Watson is initially being reprogrammed as a doctor, so yes, Dr. Watson, what we find here is that Watson is the only body able on the planet to keep up to date with all the published research in medicine. Your GP, who you go and see, is someone who was trained with the latest knowledge at the time, but has a great deal of difficulty keeping up with the latest research and findings. So computers these days are increasingly being put to the point at which we have to understand that they will assist in the way in which products and services are used, or indeed actually built in the first instance. We all carry around with us now a supercomputer in the name of a smartphone. And on the bottom right of this slide, you can see some numbers there which probably look familiar to you. It's called the second half of the chessboard because it just shows the power of exponential growth. The issue here, or the apocryphal story, is that the gentleman who invented chess took it to the Indian emperor and showed him how it worked. And the emperor said, "This is fantastic. I'm a generous emperor. What would you like? I can give you anything you like." The inventor said, "I'm a very modest person. All I'd like is some rice, please. What I'd like is 1 grain of rice on the first of the checkers, then double it on the next one, double it again on the next one, and so on, all the way through the chessboard." Well, as you can see, going from 1 to 2, then to 4, then to 8, then to 16, then to 32, then to 64, 128, these numbers start to become familiar to us all because these are the numbers that we see in terms of computer power. What happens, of course, is that over 20 odd years, we've followed Moore's law in the creation of computers, which doubles more or less every 18 months. So now we've got to a point at which we have computers that we carry around with us, which probably have 0.5 terabyte of data available to them. So the next time that we double the capacity of computers and chips, we're now starting to talk about 1 terabyte. And then 2 terabytes. So from a company's perspective and market's perspective, it's not, can I have the computing power? It's now, what do I do with it? What new and entirely revolutionary ideas can I come up with, which really now can be powered by some very small amounts of machines which we carry around with us. And we now get to this issue of things like wearables. So strategy changes. And in that respect, these smart connected devices that we talked about before in terms of some of those wearables that I showed you in one of those slides before, have been addressed by Michael Porter, who some of you may well know, in the latest work, which is talking about the 10 key strategic choices that companies now face because of the connected world that we now live in. Now, how do they want to utilize the data becomes a fundamental part of the added value of any company, not just the service that they provide. So from a core benefit, we need to think about the exostructures that we now put around the companies in order to champion the customer. The exostructure that goes around a customer, around a company, now is the element that we have user forums. Many of you will probably have an iPhone. If you were to go into an Apple shop, the Apple shop now has an ability to obviously sell you goods, but one of its main functions is how you use that product and to make sure that you are a satisfied customer. So what we need, therefore, is to understand what the customer wants to do with that product. So Apple is constantly collecting data in order to champion the customer within the company. And in many respects, what they do is they then look at the customer forums that they have helped create and that they monitor, which might be on Google or wherever it happens to be, to see what questions are being asked and what solutions are brought about. And they're not doing it themselves, they're allowing the customers to come up with their own solution. And therefore, they are linking with those customers in order to be able to provide new services and products. So championing the customer becomes very important to them. So once we've understood the three core elements, we now need to understand what are the technical capabilities that we need to consider. And these are digital, risk, measurement, communications, channels, customer, value, and brand. And the CIM's skills can be seen as a matrix of 8 competencies and at 5 levels of ability. And using a diagram like this, you can draw what it is that you feel that you need to be in terms of competent in any one of those skills, but not necessarily perhaps as competent in others. So you may well feel that communications and brand management you need to be highly competent in, but in understanding things such as measurement and analytics, maybe less so. Doesn't mean you're ignoring them, but it doesn't mean that you're an expert in them. So the way in which the CIM has now structured its qualifications is to allow you to choose the elements that you want to learn more about. And so what we have, therefore, is these levels here, which start off with a foundation or introductory certificate at the lower level, a certificate, a diploma, then a chartered diploma, and then continuing professional development thereafter to get to that authoritative state. And the way in which the structure now is that these qualifications can be modular. There are individual areas which can be taken, and you can move yourself up, say, the digital route from a digital essentials right the way through to digital strategy, but you don't have to move all the way with all of those subjects. So branding, for example, is an important area for us all to consider. And this is an interesting example. I mean, it's taken, what, nearly 100 years before someone who has seen an idea of a toaster and decided that a toaster should be designed so the toast goes in sideways. This particular one ran a design award of European Consumer Choice and has been very, very successful. It comes from a Turkish company. So we have to think about risk as well. We think about the ways in which risk might impact. And I'll just go back to that one there because I think that's quite interesting, because what we have is a situation where you could enter a marketplace with quite a degree of logic here. If you're in the canned drinks marketplace, you might look and say, well, what's the greatest growth in canned drinks? Well, actually, it's in energy drinks. And you might be an energy company that says, actually, there's not a great deal of growth in the portable energy that I sell at the moment, but there are opportunities elsewhere. So as a corporate entity, you might look for new strategic opportunities. So there's an interesting point here. This actually is a real product. It does exist in a particular country. I don't think it's been rolled out any further. And there's 2 ways in which you can look at it. It's a brilliant piece of brand extension, or dependent on what you would think about, you may well say, okay, that would be something like battery acid. So people's response could be entirely different from what you want. So you have to think about risk, and you have to think about reputation management. Communications, standard one these days, but much, much more complicated because we now live in a mobile world. And we need a situation where we need to think about social media. We need to think about the fact that we're working with people who are constantly being communicated now on a mobile device. And so communications here and the way in which we then price things, distribute them, is all part of the communications mix now. People's understanding of a brand is based very strongly on what they perceive through the lens of a mobile device, whether it happens to be a handheld one, whether it happens to be a tablet. And we need to think very clearly about the different social medias that are available to us to communicate with, as well as the traditional. And it's also probably useful here just to draw a traditional point, which is, although there has been a tremendous increase in the amount of communications done in the digital space, it is still the minority. The majority of communications is still done offline, because basically we live offline. But we do need to understand the digital capability of any company. And this is probably a slightly complex diagram, but basically is showing the inside circle as being the 7 to 10 P's of marketing, and what the digital impact has had on each of those. We now have a significant number of tools at our fingertips in marketing. We need to understand them. We need to at least be aware that they exist, even if we don't use them. And we need to think about how we would use them and integrate them. Whilst we might work in silos in organizations, doing social media over there, advertising or communications over there, and product development over in a different building, the consumer gets the lot in one go. And so we have to think about integration, and we have to think about management. So understanding of this digital impact is fundamental. And here's quite an interesting aspect, which is from a point of view of communications or a value proposition. Let's go back to that, because it's an interesting one in terms of time. You may have seen it before, but if you happen to understand the nature of what it is that people are using by time of day, then you'll see here that tablets tend to be used much more in the evenings than smartphones or computers. And therefore, you can think quite clearly about how it is you might want to get your message across to people who are sitting on the sofa watching a television program in one eye, and they've got an eye on a tablet or a smartphone with their other eye, because we tend these days to be using a lot of two-screen activities. So the value proposition becomes an important one. New product development, therefore, becomes very, very important in terms of the way in which we actually think about the nature of what we offer. And a lot of that now changes from some very interesting sources. Some places that are being very, very innovative are actually in Africa. Bottom right is M-Pesa, which some of you may well have come across. This is a mobile payment system. It dominates the Kenyan and East African marketplace now. It's owned by Safaricom, which is owned by Vodafone, who is about to bring that into the UK market. The top left is a very interesting area, because the medical apps marketplace is huge, not only in Africa, but increasingly in Western Europe and around the world. As medical resources are put under considerable strain, the ability to self-diagnose and reduce, therefore, the pressure on medical staff becomes very, very important. So we need to think about the way in which we use apps and technology to add value, and also to distribute the products or service that we have. Channel marketing now becomes very important. And we can add to that this issue of 3D printers, because it's been one that's been heralded as very, very important, but is yet to come through. But there is a lot of experimentation now in fabrication, whether it happens to be with Martha Stewart products for household goods, whether it's the fact that you can now get a chef version and create sweets for children's parties out of these devices. But the likelihood is that someone not too many moves from where you are will have got a desktop 3D printing machine to actually experiment with is probably analogous to the slow but inevitable growth of things like video machines, which in the 1970s were considered to be rather unusual, but now we wouldn't be able to do without the recording devices over the last 10 or so years, and now streaming. So customer experience. So we need to understand how people go about their collection of information and how they make their buying decisions. The top in white is a standard historical way in which people would become aware of a product, evaluate the options and the ideas that there are alternatives in the marketplace, make a purchase, and expect the delivery of that, whether it happens to be taking it home, having it delivered, but then consuming it. But the world has changed quite a lot, because now awareness becomes filtered by the different media that different age groups will be exposed to. They will also evaluate now based by peer groups, things like TripAdvisors and others which are offering ratings of people's feedback. The purchase may often be rewarded, people gain points, etc., is a way that which people can influence that purchase. Delivery now becomes a very important aspect of the way in which the customer experience is perceived and indeed monitored. And we have a situation now, I'm sure you experience it as much as I, that in the old days when you ordered something from Apple, you got an email to say that it had been dispatched, and the next thing you knew that it had been delivered. Now you get told that it's not only been dispatched, it's now going to be delivered before the date that they originally suggested, then that it's actually on the road and will be delivered today, and then an email or a text to say that it's being delivered even if you weren't home. So we expect more now. Customers' experience delivery is becoming a defining fact, and especially as a lot of marketplaces move to gifting as opposed to just buying the product for oneself, gifting becoming a big marketplace. So consumption, we look for feedback, we look for feed forward in terms of people giving reviews and suggesting, and also giving referral to others. Much of this, of course, is now stored in the cloud. It's stored on computers and machines which can be accessed by large data finding algorithms. And so this measuring and monitoring of success now becomes critical. And we are in a situation today of constantly being in a situation of looking for new insights from that data. So those are the slides that I wanted to go through, and the element really is to identify, for you, to help you identify which elements of the new standards are most appropriate to you, some understanding hopefully of which levels might be appropriate for you, and I'm happy now to take questions, and back over to our moderator.
Thank you very much. We're just going to begin answering the questions that have been submitted during today's presentation. As a reminder, you can still submit questions through the questions pane in your attendee control panel. So, Charles, we have a question here. If I have no prior education in marketing, but I have 7 years of field experience, what level would I be?
Okay, that's a fairly regular question we get asked these days. We would need, or any study centre would need, to look at the detail of what your experience was. But let us assume that it was 7 years of experience from the ground upwards. Then the question becomes, how much of that is at management level? Normally speaking, we would probably say that you would be at the professional diploma, which is the main operational qualification level. But if you happen to have been working in a large company, or you've been working in a small company but with significant overall senior management, then there's a possibility that you might be at the highest chartered level. But there, there is a danger that you don't have the underpinning theories that would be important, because you'd need to be learning things that you hadn't experienced. So the general answer to your question would be you'd be at the professional diploma level.
Fantastic. A question here, what scares you about the future of marketing?
Nothing really scares me. I suggest that probably more of it's to say is it's more exciting. I think complexity might be one of the issues that is behind a question like that. There is an awful lot now to be understood. I think in the days certainly when I might have started marketing, there was an understanding that marketing was about communications, and that business management did all the other things like pricing. But now there is a general understanding, because of the level of business education over the last 20 to 30 years, that most people at management level will understand the importance and main skills of marketing. And therefore, it becomes a much more complex and integrated approach. It's no longer just a case of creating advertisements or communications and dumping them in the market. Marketing now is a key part in value creation and business development. So I wouldn't say there was a great deal that scared me. I'd say more of it actually excites me.
That's great, thank you. Leonore was asking, she's keen to pursue a blended learning experience. Do you have any accredited consultants throughout the UK, and how would be best to get in touch?
Okay, the answer to that is yes, we do. We have plenty of them. You can get in touch with me directly, and I'm Charles at marketingcollege, all one word, .com. I'm happy to get in touch, or indeed you can get in touch via the website.
Great. How are these qualifications treated by employers and line managers? So how particularly does the qualification take my career to the next level?
Right, okay. The answer to that is somewhat nuanced, dependent on the individual level, but in most instances, managers and certainly HR people these days understand and recognize a CIM qualification. It's been around more than anybody else's. It's internationally recognized, and in most instances people are going to have a good understanding as to what you're going to learn. Once you're at, say, the certificate level or the diploma level, these are well understood and would probably easily take you up to the next level within your organization. One of the slides which unfortunately jumped is that from our research, we found that 76% of people who took these qualifications are 5 years later still employed by the same organization, but in higher positions. So for a lot of people who traditionally within the UK companies would say, I'm not quite sure I want to put someone through some training because I might lose them, I think that has turned around now. Most employers realize that they need to have people with the right levels of skills to improve productivity, and therefore they are likely to be highly receptive to your idea that you want professional training.
Thank you. Sarah was just asking, as a recent marketing communications graduate, is a master's or a CIM qualification preferred?
Depends what you want to do. If you want to specialize in a niche particular area, robotic marketing or something like that, then a master's on that subject might be more appropriate. But in most instances, I would suggest that you would need to enhance your academic qualification with a professional qualification. You may have learnt the theories and seen case studies, but the way in which these professional qualifications are assessed is work-based. So essentially you are going to apply what you have learned and what you will learn in a very up-to-date syllabus in your real live company or work environment. And as a result, that gives you a great deal more confidence in the market. And that's what a lot of this is about, improving your level of confidence that you know that you're making the right decisions. So in most instances, I would always say a professional qualification over a further academic one.
Perfect. Amy was asking, how quickly can you progress from the certificate to the diploma, and is CPD required in between?
CPD is not required in between. Going from the certificate to the diploma, well, quite frankly, once you've finished the certificate, if you've taken what probably is the average of around 12 months and you've been working and applying your certificate, I would probably see that you would need maybe 3 to 6 months just to embed it and then move yourself on to the diploma. You've got to give yourself some time to make sure that you understand what you've learnt, not just in the assessments, but actually applying it, rather than just shoveling more knowledge into your head. But it is possible to fast track them.
Shani was asking, at what level qualification is best to start recording CPD hours?
I would say probably professional diploma. You can start at certificate, but the biggest issue you've got to bear in mind is that in order to become chartered, you have to be a full member of the Chartered Institute of Marketing, and then you have to do 2 years or have 2 years of CPD under your belt. In order to become a full member, you will need to have workplace experience as well as your professional diploma or postgraduate diploma. And in that instance, there is little point at the certificate level, because for very large numbers of people, you would not be at the right level experience-wise to become a full member.
Jodie just wanted a bit of clarity. What are CPD hours?
Okay. CPD stands for Continuing Professional Development. Like a lot of chartered bodies, the CIM is a little bit late behind this one in terms of it coming into professional skills as opposed to things like accountancy. But the move over the last few years has been that people at the senior levels of any profession should be chartered. So you would probably employ a chartered accountant to do your auditing, you would have a chartered surveyor to do your surveying and building of houses, would be a chartered architect, etc. So someone in charge of your marketing at a senior level needs to say that not only do I know how marketing is historically, I have to be up to date and understand, like the point I was making before about a doctor, the latest ideas, even if I don't necessarily use them or believe them, but I need to know about them. So CPD hours is the way in which professional marketers record their activity of keeping up to date, of basically continuing their professional development. And the CIM has a very nice little app now which allows you to record those things and to upload it. And dependent on which level you are, depends therefore on the amount of reflection and consideration you need to give. But essentially it was around 35 hours. It's a little bit more complicated now, but essentially if you're at a middle level, a management level, you should be doing CPD as part of membership of the CIM. It costs no more, and accumulate your hours.
Connie was asking, I have a full-time job. Would I struggle to study a qualification?
No, Connie, you wouldn't. And yes, Connie, you would. 90-odd% of people who are doing professional qualifications are in full-time employment. Some of them are managing children at the same time as being in full-time employment, and sometimes that can be a bit of a strain, as it can be dependent obviously on the fact that you probably work very long hours. But it is fairly reasonable. Normally you would probably be doing something like 10 hours a week, so it might be a weekend afternoon, and it might be a couple of evenings that you would be reading and learning. You might be attending classes for an evening class, or you might give up a weekend to do an executive program. But it is usually manageable over a period of 12 months.
Thanks, Charles. Amy was asking, you said the majority of consumers still use computers. Do you think with the developing digital marketing industry, these figures will change? And if so, how long do you think this will take?
Oh, now there's an interesting one. Certainly, I think the situation was that most people of my generation were introduced to computers as being these devices that we have on our desktops. Most people of my son's generation were introduced to computing power through a mobile device, which is these days inherently a mobile smartphone. I think the likelihood is within the next 5 years, we will see a fairly significant decline in computing as a fixed device, and we'll see it now being something which is much more individual, personal, and mobile. Something you might be wearable. Everybody talks about Google Glasses and how it didn't take off. Well, not every product gets it right first time. Apple Newton isn't the device that we're all carrying around, but we have now a new version that Google's looking at. Just down the road from me in Cambridge, we've got people who are now at the Microsoft Research Labs about to produce their sets of glasses, which are internet connected. So I think the likelihood is that we'll have a lot of wearable technology fairly quickly.
Great. Duncan was just asking, I'd like my employers to contribute to the costs of me doing a CIM qualification. Are there any tips as to how best to present this opportunity?
Okay. Yes, you should basically consider the fact that you will be a much more productive person, that you are going to gain the skills that they want, and it'll help you to do the job better. I think you've also got a scenario here that most employers these days will tend to contribute, but will have a clause in that contribution which says that you won't leave the company without, won't leave the company. And if you do, you pay back the amount of money that you've been loaned, which is fairly standard these days. And I think companies should pay. They can get a tax deduction from it because they're training, and they obviously can reclaim the VAT.
And Ryan was just asking, if he was to go for a marketing job holding a CIM level 3 qualification compared to somebody with more experience working in a marketing role, would he have just as good a chance as the other candidate?
To be honest, Ryan, the level 3 is that you have at that level of awareness. You've gained a qualification which says, I know what marketing is about, and it is really marketing principles and customer communications. You would need, once you've got that, I would suggest to move up and gain your level 4 before you would be able to gain that level playing field that you were looking at in terms of experience. Most employers will want a match. They will want experience. They want to know that you know what you're doing if you do the job that they've got in mind. So experience on your CV is something that you need to have, whether it's in the same industry or whether it's actually doing the same thing, but shows that you have the ability to cope with the level, intensity, and degree of complexity that they're asking you for. A level 3 is very important in getting knowledge, but a level 4 is more important because it shows you much more about your ability to apply it.
Thank you, Charles. Final question from Sarah. Do you think there is a market for geolocation apps in the B2B environment, since this has gained considerable traction in consumer markets with the like of Google and Snapchat?
Well, Sarah, we could have a very interesting discussion about that. Yes is the answer in short terms. The question becomes, how do you define them and what is the value proposition? certainly in the B2B environment in the construction world, not only is geolocation very important, but also virtual reality now. At the recent infrastructure conference, which I attended down in London, there was the issue here where you could actually hold virtual planning meetings with your headset on and walk around the proposed building while someone was actually on site, so that you could see the changes that were happening because of the contours of the land. So I think the answer is undoubtedly yes. The real bonanza is to be had in deciding what's the most important ones that people are prepared to pay for. Very interesting question.
Great. Thank you very much, Charles, and thank you to everyone for attending today's webinar. Once you leave today's webinar, you will receive a survey on the presentation, and we would appreciate it if you would complete that and provide your feedback. You will also receive a follow-up email with a link to view a recording of today's webinar. If you're interested in finding out more about CIM qualifications, then please visit our website and select Find a Study Centre for more information. On behalf of Charles and CIM, thank you for joining us today and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.